All right. Hi, Harry. Hi, Noor. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today's date is April 13th, 2013, and we're here to discuss the handling of Gaza and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I just said, would you mind just giving our viewers, the people who are in the audience, a quick background of yourself and who you are and why you're so passionate about this subject?
Um, yeah, my name is Noor Harazeen. I'm 23 years old, girl from Gaza. I was raised in Abu Dhabi in UAE for 16 years, and then I moved to Gaza with my family to study like high school and university here. Um, I started as an activist, posting news about what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in West Bank, um, like any news from Palestine. I started participating in demonstrations in Nakba Day, the Catastrophe Day, and Naksa Day, and many occasions, Palestinian occasions. Um, then someone offered me to work in a TV as an English reporter from Strip, using my English language. And the first time it did not work, so it motivated me to start a Facebook page, a news Facebook page. I called it Update from Gaza, Noor Harazeen. I'm happy that we reached almost 22,000 in 2 years. And in this page, I share almost all the news from Gaza, videos, updates, breaking news about attacks and stuff like that. A year ago, I was accepted to work as an English reporter in Al-Ittijah channel, and now I'm finishing my studies in Azhar University as an English education teacher and working with Al-Ittijah.
Great. And Harry, would you mind just doing the same?
Yeah, of course. My name is Harry Fear. I'm also in and campaigner for Palestine Solidarity Movement, the Deeds. Max, you cannot hear me?
No, I hear you. You can't.
So I'm here as a campaigning filmmaker, journalist, activist, campaigner, reporter, and at the moment, a boy last winter here in Gaza.
Great.
A film which is the only one, indeed is the only video, to cut this boy who was playing football, who was an innocent. So this underscores the need for such work to be done here in Gaza to highlight what goes on here and the tragedy of Palestine.
Great. So, Harry, that's okay. Would you mind just giving us your analysis of what's taking place inside of Gaza right now? Is it calm? Is it hectic? Is it pretty crazy? Can you tell us about what's really going on there right now?
You mean like Israeli attacks or violations or?
Yeah, exactly.
I tell you, for like today, there's nothing. There have been no airstrikes or anything. But yesterday there was an incursion in Eastern Khan Yunis, which is became normal for the Gazan people, for the Israeli tanks to incursion in the borders area in the 300 meters buffer zone. That after the truce agreement, Palestinians are allowed to go in these 300 meters. This was Palestinians could go to these 300 meters of buffer zone for the first 2 weeks, and then the Israelis started shooting Palestinians, started their incursions in these places. But there's no recent attacks or anything. The Israeli occupation forces closed Karm Abu Salem border, which is the only goods border to Gaza. Because 4 days ago, there was a rocket launched from Gaza that hit a farm and no one was injured, there was no damages. Because of this rocket, the Israeli occupation forces decided to close Karm Abu Salem goods. Yesterday we were planning to buy some yogurt and milk, and unfortunately we were not able to know basic food needs for Gazans like yogurt and milk and other stuff in the market due to the closing of Karm Abu Shalom.
Right. Right. So, Harry, can you kind of elaborate on this blockade? Because it's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. What can you kind of elaborate on what this blockade is all about and what's occurring because of it?
The blockade now has been in effect for thousands of days for about 6 years. And the effect of this is to really starve Gaza of any kind of access to a normal pursuit of happiness, of normal life. But it's worth giving attention to what Israel's supposed goal. Now, this is supposedly a security blockade, which is apparently under international law, according to the Israelis, permitted. The problem becomes that it penalizes the whole population by starving the Strip, the Gaza Strip, a tiny piece of land, 42 kilometers in height, starving it of normal economic and civilian traffic, export and entry and exit. And that has had, and still is having, a devastating impact on the lives of thousands of about 1.6 million Palestinians in Gaza. Most of them are refugees, and most of them, around 2/3, subscribed to receive relief services from UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, the United Nations Humanitarian Program. So the situation is very dire. This security blockade, the surface of it, appears to be illegal, however. Why? Because most of the population are being penalized for the actions of the militants here, according to Israel. Most of the population are children. So again, absolutely, there is a collective punishment of the children. So these are some of the background points to the blockade. Why Israel even had to make the blockade, why there was this violence that Israel was feeling from Gaza, is fairly easy to discern. Just speak to the terrorists, so-called, and you hear that they are militarily armed, violently, whatever you want to call it, resisting an occupation of their land. Do they have a point, actually? Well, if you go to the United Nations and if you look at international law, if you go to the International Court of Justice, look at their advisory opinion, you'll see that indeed Israel is someone else's country against the law. So that background point is very, very important, which is that security blockade is not, because it's collectively punishing most of those here in Gaza City, in the Gaza Strip.
Right. So, I guess my next question would be to Noor, and you guys can kind of take it from here, would be, do Israelis have any sort of justification in feeling that their security, would be at risk if they just entirely lifted the blockade? Like, is there a real threat of, militants inside of Gaza that, could, let's say, bring in weapons if the blockade was removed and it could threaten Israelis? Do you think that that's a real concern? Noor, did you hear that?
Basically not. I heard the last part, so I'm going to answer that. Basically, blockade imposed on the Gaza Strip by Israel started when Hamas controlled Gaza Strip. So they, at first few years, they stopped letting food inside. So I can't imagine anyone smuggling weapon inside flour packages from Israel or from West Bank. It's impossible because the Israeli occupation forces really make sure everything is not Gaza. So basically, I left the blockade. I left a few first days of war. We could not find any bread to eat, not find any yogurt, any milk, any fruits, any vegetables, anything. And these are the basic stuff. And we were literally starving. a year ago or even more, Israeli occupation forces allowed some food into Gaza, and that food was chocolate, soda, and like crisps and stuff like that. Um, Recently, they allowed like more stuff like yogurt, milk, some meat, but the basic thing here is the building material. And it's a very important point. Why? Because building materials into Gaza is going to help build the economy here. It's going to help us rebuild our factories that were destroyed in the war. It's going to help the people rebuilding homes, normal people. It's going to be help the government in Gaza to reconstruct what was destroyed in the war, in Kastled and in the recent war. What is happening now is going tunnels. Um, the smuggled tunnels, yeah, you can say maybe we can find some few smuggling tunnels that people bring some weapons from Egypt to Gaza, but this is normal. Like we are under war, we are under occupation. It's normal to import stuff to defend ourselves. Like if the resistance movement and resistant groups did not have any materials or any weapons to defend ourselves during the 8 days war, we will like all of us could be dead basically. We need to defend ourselves. There is no weapons coming to Gaza from any Israeli border, of course. Um, but nowadays we are like 80% think on the goods that are being smuggled by the tunnels. That will not be like what's the word like not destroyed. They will not like be bad to use after
Right.
a time, like yogurt and milk and flour and stuff like that.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. So, Harry, would you mind, just if you don't mind, Harry, would you, and quickly before I ask you a question, everyone who's inside the room, if you can please not click start speaking, because it could result in a bug taking place. Thank you so much. Harry, what I would ask you is, do you think that there's any justification on the Israeli government's end that there is a security threat ultimately, and that part of the reason of this blockade needs to be to defend themselves? I mean, do you see if a full entire blockade was lifted, do you see more arms landing into the hands of militants? Do you think that that's a real threat? Can you kind of elaborate on that?
The thing here is that, which is the security threat, the number one security threat that Israel faces is from groups that want to get their land back. That is, groups which believe that Israel is occupying their country. Now, Israel is occupying their country, so the point here is it's very difficult to talk about defense in the sense which people normally understand the word. Why? Because it's difficult to defend yourself when you're occupying someone else. Doesn't really become defense anymore. It becomes subverting resistance. So defense is a little bit of a miscalculation, but from the Israeli point of view, they do call it defense. Why? Because actually they don't really accept they're occupying someone else's country. So in a sense, for them, it is defense. But they should be afraid of armed resistance, damn right. Why? Because they're occupying someone else's country. And those that are being occupied have a legal, moral, and practical right, and interest, even, in pursuing that. So the point here is that the essential point, again, unfortunately.
So, hey, Noor, do you hear me?
Yeah, Max, I can hear you. See, this is something like even the Israelis do not allow like electric connection wires to enter Gaza for Al Etisalat company, which is the company that provides internet to Gaza, and that's why it's affecting us. It's not that good, and it's also because of the Israeli blockade.
Right. So Noor, I mean, Harry brings up the concept of groups inside of Gaza being annoyed that their land is being occupied and they want it back. So ultimately, I mean, and I guess this can kind of transition into solutions if we want to touch on it. But I mean, until they have that land back, these groups does
Sorry, Max, being annoyed.
they're annoyed that they're upset that they don't have that their land is being occupied. So my question to you would be is there any real legitimate peace that Hamas would want with Israelis until they were to get their land back?
Basically, hello?
Yeah, did you hear that question, Noor?
Hello? Everything just stopped.
Noor, do you hear me?
Max?
Yeah, I hear you,
Max,
Noor.
I could not hear your question clearly, but I can tell you more about the factions and the parties and the governments. Basically, Fatah, they totally support the two-state solution on the 1967 lands. Hamas supported the PID when Abu Mazen went to the UN and asked for a state. But on the other hand, they said that this is the first step, but we will not stop resisting and asking for the whole of Palestine. Islamic Jihad, which is a resistance movement that does not accept to go into politics because they think that getting into politics means accept slow. They do not accept the option. They believe in one state in the whole of Palestine, one people, Palestinian people, Christians, Muslims who lived in Palestine before 1948. I think for Hamas movement to accept the 67 borders, but they will continue the resistance. Same with jihad, Islamic Jihad. They do not believe that is called peace because they think, and it is an occupation. And like my mom, she's a refugee from Ashdod, and accepting the 1967 solution, she will go back to Ashdod. But other families who are from Haifa, Yafa, other parts of Palestine will not be back. But it is their homeland, and they still have the keys. And like my mom told me a story that her family, they left their home, and they left the fire in the oven still work because they thought it's just a few hours and they will come back. And this is how it is for most of the Palestinians, especially refugees. They want to go back to their homelands. They cannot understand the two-state solution. The two-state solution was imposed by the state of Israel and the UN and everything like that. But we Palestinians, and I'm a dozen, but other Palestinians like refugees from other parts of Palestine do not accept something as states or peace or anything like that because they want to go back to their homelands. They want to go back to their to smoke their land. This is why.
Right. So, Harry, do you think? And Harry, do you want to just maybe say something quickly with your camera turned off, and let's see if it comes in clearly? Are you there? Hey, Harry, you hear me?
I can hear you decent. Yeah, I can hear you decently. I can hear you decent. Yeah, I can hear you decently, Max. Yeah.
Okay, great. So my next question would be, Harry, is do you think then ultimately that do you think ultimately that the best way to accomplish and get peace will be for it to be a one-state solution where Palestinians are given their right to return and they're able to go back to their homes? Or do you think, a two-state solution is more along the lines of what Palestinians want with the eligibility of a right to return as well with their own state? I mean, what's your judgment, being in the country?
experience, Max, is not a clear one. Well, my experience, Max, is not a clear one. I visited the bank a few years ago now. The West Bank, I heard much more the narrative from Palestinians, generally speaking, this is that the two-state solution would be a few years ago now. I'm not sure that would have changed massively, but there was something noticeable there. However, in Gaza, I see or have seen something quite different, which is much more of an advocacy or war for the one-state solution. I think that the solution in this respect is something which should be decided by Palestinians, and I mean literally just Palestinians, not international. I think that that's the only way to get justice, is to get a mandate for the solution. People, the displaced, So I don't advocate for either position, although I am able to give arguments on either side. Just to give a couple of those, as you referred to, with the one-state solution, and clearly facilitate Palestinians, most people assess. The two-state solution doesn't. But on the other hand, the world, the international community, United Nations, etc., has accepted it for, well, decades. It's the stated advantages and disadvantages, if you want to call it that, on either side of the fence, so to speak. But my experience, certainly in Gaza, as I say, is that the one state gets a hell of a lot more warmth than the two-state solution.
Right. And so, you know, I guess my next question that I would ask each of you, if you want to sort of talk about this point, is like, you know, most people would say that the country of Israel, you know, really isn't going anywhere because it's been a country for now, you know, over 60, 70 years, right? So my question would be, is like, how then, knowing that, you know, Israelis are going to stay in their place that they're calling their homeland, and Palestinians want to be given back some of their homeland, ultimately, you know, isn't it, how do Palestinians accept the fact that, you know, Jews and Israelis are going to, you know, still be living there? I mean, how does a Palestinian really, you know, bear with that fact that Israelis are still going to be living in their land? Is that one of the pressing issues here? Is that they don't want them to be in their land, or that you know, they should be given that right to return to the places that they came from? You know, and ultimately, Noor, do you think part of the problem is that Palestinians aren't going to want to live in a one-state solution where the state itself is called Israel? Do you think that plays into, you know, part of the issue here?
Of course, but we will accept one-state solution with title of Palestine. According to most of the Palestinians and to all Palestinian factions, resistance factions, the one-state solution is about Palestinians who lived in Palestine before 1948, before the occupation. As the 6 million Palestinian refugees have the right to go back to their homes in Palestine, we think that the millions of Israelis who came from Europe and from around the world have the right to go back to where they came from.
So Noor, then...
Because Palestine, as I said, at the same time, it's like Palestine for one people, which is Palestinians. It does not matter what religion are they following, if they're Muslims, Jewish, Christians. This is the basic thing that most of people do not understand. They think that what we want is like, I don't know, like terrorist state in Palestine without any Jewish, without any Christians and stuff like that. But it is not right. It's a point that many people get it wrong.
So Noor, do you think that one of the ideal scenarios, can you give us your thoughts on this situation? If you had if there was a two-state solution where Palestinians were given their own state, but Palestinians were also able to get their right to return, to move back into the areas where they came from. Is that like a relatively good idea? Can you kind of talk about that sort of solution, and then Harry, you can discuss that idea also? And because the reason I ask it is because most people around the world, it'd be kind of crazy to think that Israel will just kind of go away or Israelis will just go away. So somehow there's got to be a way of living together. And does that seem like an ideal scenario based on the current circumstances?
I tell you something, Max. It's like impossible for us to fit 6 million Palestinian refugees inside the small Gaza Strip and the West Bank without Israeli settlements. Like, it's such a small land. This is first. Second, even if we fit them, they will still refugees because they are not from Gaza. They are not from West Bank, the West Bank towns or villages. They are from the land which is inside the occupied Palestine of 1948. This is the most important point. Maybe some Palestinians who are like sick of war, violations, sick of killings, prisoners, and all will accept this as like a first step. They will be like, we already went through a lot in our life, 65 years of occupation, 65 years of violations of the international laws, 65 years of prisoning, arresting innocent Palestinian and innocent kids, and they will accept this because they are really like sick of this ongoing occupation and violation. But for other Palestinians, and let me say that for like most of the youth of Palestine nowadays, it's just hard for us to accept 1968 border. It's not only our land. Our land is from Ras al Naqoura, tip of Palestine, to Al Naqab and Bir Saba, which they call it Bir Shabi'a. Okay, all of Palestine is ours. We have the right to go. We have the right to return back to our homeland. And for many of us, they cannot even accept the idea of two-state solution.
The thing that strikes me, Max, is that the opinions about the solution 1, 2 state, 3 state, 15 state, 99 states, or 0 states is something which it can kind of go on and on forever. I mean, the one state solution doesn't necessarily confer that Zionist Israelis will be living there. According to one definition, those that moved to Israel in the 50s, for example, will have to go home to Europe. I mean, that's one person's reading of one-state solution, of course. The other is that everyone that's living now as an Israeli gets to stay, and that the ability for, sorry to say, Jews to just be able to move there and get instant citizenship would presumably be ended, and there would be more system for those that live there, including the Israelis who have moved there in the last few decades, who have been born there. But I don't know of any groups or individuals that politically advocate for a one-state solution that seeks to send back the soul to the world. But what I do hear is a lot of organisations, not a lot by an international standard, but a lot by a Palestinian solidarity movement standard, a lot of advocating for a one-state solution where born Israelis can stay, and where everyone can live in peace regardless of category, etc. And end of story on that note. So there is diversity in this respect on even.
Right. So Harry, but do you agree that ultimately that one-state solution, one of the sort of root issues that seems to be popping up is then what that state will be called? I feel like from the people that we have on Vonvo, really in the end, they hate to kind of admit it, but it seems like it just kind of boils down to that point. What's that one state going to be called? Right? And can you kind of... It seems like such a simple statement, but I feel like people avoid it because that's ultimately what it really boils down to. Do you sort of agree with that?
I understand the question. It's actually not as mystical a question as people might like to believe. The point really is, who's the majority of the population? If the majority of the population are Palestinians, they can change the name of the country to whatever they want. They can call it Zimbabwe too if they want. They can call it Palestine if most of them are Palestinians. If most of them are not Palestinians, then of course there may be a reason to call it Israel. But I don't think that in 100 years' time we'll see a one-state solution called Israel. I don't think so.
Right. Let me get my... Okay, great. So let's see then here. Do you think ultimately, and Noor and Harry, you can kind of discuss this back and forth? Can you kind of talk about, the Palestinian authorities, and I didn't actually, no pun intended, just the Palestinian government, so the PA and Fatah and Hamas. Can you talk about, whether or not you believe they represent properly what the Palestinian people want? Because I feel like ultimately in the media that is something which, let's say Palestinian people who come on Vonvo, they'll say one thing, but then what gets reported in the media is another thing. And ultimately what gets reported in the media typically stems from government. So can you talk about, Noor, whether or not you think the Palestinian people currently are being represented properly by their government authorities? Can you talk about that?
No. Why? Because either of the two governments, Hamas government in Gaza or the Fatah government in West Bank, are legal. Because there's no elections, basically. There is no elections. The people has no right to choose, basically, what they want. So what is going on now is that the PA is controlling the West Bank and controlling the people of West Bank the way they want. And the Hamas government are the people of Gaza the way they want. And this is the basic problem. And this is where the role of the youth came. Because like a few years ago, we made like a revolution. We called it the 15th of March revolution to end division. It did not work yet. There was a little bit talks of new elections. But this is the basic thing that we Palestinians are facing. If the division ended, if we have a new government, and everything will be better. The people will be united, the governments will be united. But on the other hand, you have another problem, which is the international community. Because the international community takes Hamas as a terrorist organization, and they will not accept any government with a terrorist organization in it. But basically, so 6 years ago, Hamas was in a democratic way elected to be in the government. And this is a very important message to address to the international community and to the people, to the foreigners and internationals, that we Palestinians have the right to elect our governments. If it's PLFP, if it's Fatah, if it's Hamas, we have the right to elect our government the way we want. And the international community have to accept our decision by accepting our government.
So how does that make you feel, Noor, that, ultimately the international community really doesn't think that they should be in a position to negotiate with the government representing you? I mean, how does that make you feel as a Palestinian?
I tell you something, like, being a Palestinian is something amazing to be, but being a Gazan, it's like something terrifying for some people in some countries. Like, let's discuss like the visas for European countries. If it's like a Palestinian guy who's living anywhere else, or even from the West Bank, and he applies for a visa, it will be easier, much easier for him to get the visa. But for us Gazans, you will suffer almost 2 months, if not more, and you will have to issue like 6 or 7 papers that say that you are a student or working here in Gaza, that you have $20,000 in your bank account, stuff like that. Just very rare number of Palestinians who are being accepted, even scholarships outside. So this is the problem, because they do not accept the government, they do not accept the word Hamas. They think that Hamas do not represent Gazans, so there is no Gazans. Gazans is like a very special issue that we are dealing with terrorist people. Even if I'm, let's say, I'm not supporting Hamas, or I'm like a very, very Fatah lover, and I'm living in Gaza, same thing will happen to me, because basically I'm Gaza and I'm being rolled under the Hamas government. It's really very bad, and that's why the youth in the recent months and recent days started to protest, to go out in the street, to end the division. So we go in a new steps to end the division and create one democratic government that the international community will have to accept.
When is your next election for let's say a new government? When is that?
I was under the age of electing the first time 6 months ago, and 2 months ago they opened the doors for new people to register, and I registered, and we thought the election is gonna be like in a week or like 2 weeks or something, and we were probably going out of the schools holding our like small elections paper, our names and numbers. But unfortunately, till now, there is no agreement when the elections will happen, if the elections happen. And this is another one, because Fatah thinks that they rule West Bank the best, and Hamas thinks that they rule Gaza the best. So you can say like either parties can agree on new elections, because each one is like has this fear that they will lose their part. Like Fatah is fearing that they will lose their part in West Bank, because the people in West Bank will elect Hamas, and and Hamas will have the fear that people in Gaza will elect Fatah, and this is how it's going on.
Right. So Harry, can you kind of give us your take, on Harry? You're from the UK, right? So what's your take on, the government recognition inside of Gaza? Like, can you give us your journalistic standpoint on that? You obviously have done a ton of reporting. Do you think that it's just incredibly unfair that people like Noor aren't being, represented properly, and what can be done about that? And do you think ultimately nothing will really take place until that happens?
Oh, it's an absolute travesty. I mean, it's absolute injustice. If you're Palestinian, you're at the bottom of the international league tables for being treated like a human being. And if you're a Gazan, you're even in category B above any other kind of Palestinian. You're the worst of worst. And that's why there is a kind of diplomatic imprisonment of Palestinians in Gaza. It's not just the physical besiegement that takes place on the part of Egypt and Israel, but there's also this diplomatic imprisonment, which says that if you can leave Gaza to get to Egypt, and if you can afford to do so, will you be able to get out of Egypt, where you'll probably be mistreated anyway? Probably not, because of this diplomatic imprisonment. What needs to happen? I mean, this again is caused by the injustice and the general structure of oppression that exists against the Palestinians. If we wanted to alleviate this particular thing in the short or medium term, we would recognise that Hamas was elected. We would stop propping up at the expense of Gaza, and show some balance and fairness, and allow there to develop a natural equilibrium for Palestinian representation. Israel would also stop sponsoring or collaborating or facilitating the collaboration of the PA in the West Bank, and level the playing field so that the Palestinians actually had a chance at getting a fair and fresh political representation which can take forward to see a solution to the conflict. So we have, Max, really propped up the disunity and everything that flows from that as Western citizens, as Western states. So really very much the blood is on our hands on this issue as well, the issue of disunity as well.
Right, so you actually think that, you brought up an interesting point, you think that propping up the PA is having an effect on people like Noor, and it's the surrounding countries that... So Harry, do you not necessarily think it's really just... It's really not just Israel, ultimately, that's providing an injustice to Palestinians? Like, Palestinians are recognizing that there's a variety of different parties that are, providing injustice to, in their sense, Gazans?
Oh, it's absolutely clear in Gaza. It's resonating. Palestinians are aware that it's not just Israel, the occupation, but it's all the countries which support Israel, particularly in the West. And thirdly, in the West, the media agencies which run a system of information and narratives that support Israel at the expense of the Palestinians, which prop up the point two, which is the Western support for Israel, point one. So that scheme is very, very well understood here and is part of the general Palestinian narrative, which is, I would say, resounding throughout Palestine.
Right. And so, Noor, can you just you're saying that there was a question that that Mark Matan that he was mentioning, and I'm just looking through it quickly. I can't find which question it was.
Vittorio. It's about Vittorio Arrigoni, the Italian activist who was killed in Gaza.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you allow me to talk about that for...
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First, before mentioning Vittorio Arrigoni, let's mention Rachel Curry, who was crushed to death by an Israeli bulldozer in Rafah. Let's remember Tom Harandel, who's 2 days ago, it was his 10th anniversary, who was killed by an Israeli sniper, also in southern Gaza. We have to remember these names too. Vittorio Arrigoni, yes, he was killed in Gaza, but let's discuss this. There is 3 people who kidnapped him. These people said that they are from a Salafist group, and the same Salafist group, they said after that they did not have any relationship with these people. One of the people is a Jordanian who came to Gaza through a tunnel. Someone who we do not know anything about him. If he's even a Jordanian, if he is even a Palestinian or an Israeli or anything else. Like a random who came to Gaza through a tunnel a few days ago, and he participated in kidnapping Vittorio Arrigoni. Okay, this guy was killed in the clashes between Hamas, who said that they killed him. Basically, Hamas had clashes and arrested these people. One of them, the Jordanian guy, was killed. 2 or 3 other people were arrested. And for the last 2 years, we have been witnessing their trails. We have been witnessing their trails with Vittorio Arrigoni, friends. I'm a personal friend of Vittorio, with lawyers from both sides. And I can clearly tell you that it's not Hamas who killed Vittorio Arrigoni, because they gave each one of them 15-year life sentence. Yeah. This is what I want to say. And again, I want to remember Rachel Curry and Tom Handel and many people and many names who were killed, Palestinians and internationals, inside Gaza and inside the West Bank by the Israeli occupation forces. And we have proofs of that. But who have proofs of who killed Vittorio and why he was killed? No one knows. But we know why Israel killed Rachel Curry. While in their trial, they said that the driver who was driving the bulldozer did not see her while she was holding a microphone, shouting on him, and she was wearing an orange suit showing her, and she was standing in front of the bulldozer, and he crashed her. This is the Israeli justice, and this is the Israeli democratic courts and trials.
Harry, do you want to add anything on top of that? And I know it's now just past your guys' 8 o'clock. So did you want to continue speaking for a little bit further, or I know Harry, you might have something to do in a little bit, right?
Actually, Max, I have to go probably in about 5 minutes at the latest. But there's nothing really to add to what Noor said. But the point is that, maybe to elaborate on one point, that there are various theories with some, let's say, private evidence that, let's say, Palestinian actions in Gaza were not primarily behind the execution, the kidnap and execution of Vittorio Arrigoni, the Italian activist, but that there were states sponsored by other states. So I won't go into any more detail than that, but as Noor said, it's not absolutely confirmed who were responsible for this. I think one important takeaway is it's fairly obvious that this precedent of supposedly Palestinians killing this international activist, that precedent has not adequately scared off internationals from coming here. I mean, I'm not going to be here otherwise, as would dozens of others. So that is a positive takeaway, that internationals have not been, terrorized from coming, which is very, very important.
Right. All right, great. So, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Noor.
Tony, Rachel Corrie did not die. It's the word that you use in your media. She did not. She did not die. She was killed by an Israeli bulldozer who ran over her over and over again. Just to correct your information.
Right. So I guess guys, what I'll do is, since Harry needs to go shortly, and Noor, there's some people here in the chat room. So if you want to continue speaking with any of them, you're welcome to. But if we're gonna wrap up, why don't we just end with this? Noor, what would be your message to the world regarding Gaza, this conflict, and then Harry, you can go afterwards, and then we'll obviously speak soon. And I'm glad that we didn't have our little bug issues this time.
Yeah, Max. I'm happy that in the recent months, the recent years also, the social media helped the Palestinian people a lot to address their messages from Gaza. But on the other hand, we can say the ongoing violations, Israeli violations. We can see the ongoing escalations and war, and unfortunately, we can't see a big international answer for this. Like, let's take Samir al-Isawi, who was arrested as the Israeli occupation forces said that he violated the conditions of his release. He has been in a hunger strike for like almost 9 months. And yes, there's people who protest. Yes, there's people who post photos on Facebook. But unfortunately, we can't see like a real action towards the Israeli violations. Basically, the Israelis are trying to address us that they do wherever they like do a war, arrest people, continue the blockade, whatever. They want to send us a message that they can do whatever they want and just get like no one will charge them, no one will even like talk to them or anything. But also we Palestinians, we want to address that we are going to continue our fight. We will never stop. It's not going to stop. The Israelis thought that the old people who lived in Palestine will die, and the young people will be raised up, and everything will be okay, and they will forget about their rights, they will forget about their lands. But no, in fact, what's happening is totally the opposite. We are being raised on that the whole of Palestine is our land, and we have been raised to it in all the ways, on all possible ways, to get our land back. Thank you for having me.
No, of course, no problem at all. Harry, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll wrap up, all right?
Yeah, thanks, Max, for having us on. There's nothing really to add to that, apart from, I think, the fact that the world needs to make Israel answer, needs to talk to Israel and bring it into line with regard to the abuses of Palestinians' rights and territories. And that requires international support, solidarity and sympathy to be maximised in quality and quantity and as soon as possible. And that needs to be treated as an emergency responsibility by all of us in the West to have power as democratic citizens living in basically free societies with basically economic freedom and extraordinary access to technologies in the 21st century. So I really ask people to do just that. And what can we do? There are four main things. First is raise awareness and connect with Palestinians in the occupied territories via social media and etc. to build connections. So awareness and connections. The second is to pursue traditional political action in our Western democracies. The third is to boycott the corporations that are responsible for propping up Israel's oppression, particularly in the West Bank. And number four is, if it's possible, obviously for most it's not, to actually visit the occupied territories, act as witnesses and therefore very strong advocates for justice really make those human connections on the ground. So awareness, connections, boycott, political action, and visit. Thanks, man.
Right. So that's great. What I was going to say is, that's what we've built Vonvo as a platform, to promote awareness around this subject and, the Israeli cause as well, and all other, different human rights issues that are out there. So, we're happy to have each of you back and to, analyze this subject and build awareness. And, thank you so much for coming back on again. And I'm glad we didn't have that bug again this time. And, without a doubt, we will be in touch. Thank you so much, okay? Thank you.
Bye. You take care.
Bye-bye.